Whenever you see a Minecraft base that looks like this, you would probably assume that it was made in creative mode. But what if I told you that this massive base was made entirely in survival mode? And not only that, but it was made millions of blocks out on the oldest anarchy server in Minecraft. What you are looking at is Mew Megabase, one of the best kept secrets on 2B2T. At least it was, until it was griefed 4 months ago. The history behind this base is pretty insane, and is the combined effort of 36 people living in secrecy for almost 3 years. The only reason the base was even found was due to an exploit. The amount of building and terraforming that went into this one single base is simply unprecedented. It makes sense that on a server that pushes Minecraft to its absolute limits, that a survival base would be pushed to its limits. Today I'll be telling you the story of Mew Megabase, how it was created, and how before it was griefed, it was the builders that had the last laugh. We have a lot to discuss today, so let's get started. Every piece of information used in this video today was taken directly from 2B2T legend Burnsy. You may remember him as the leader of the Nether Highway group that dug the first Nether tunnel all the way to 2B2T's world border. Burnsy made a detailed post about the history of the base, and has given us the okay to make this video today. Our story begins in 2017. One of the biggest bases on the server at the time, Summermelon, was griefed, which left many of the builders there homeless. It was around this time that the X-Highway group had also finished their dig to the world border, including digging to the Positive X corner. So there were two groups on the server that had nothing to do. Two longtime players, Willy Roof and Offtopia, convinced both of these groups to work together on a new project, one that would be one of the most ambitious in 2B2T history. A gigantic build that would be based off the lost continent Mew in real-world mythology. This project was going to be a massive undertaking, and a great deal of building supplies would be needed. It just so happened that some of the players that had been brought on board for the project had discovered an item duplication exploit that was not known by the public, the chunk dupe. Since they were the only ones that knew about it, they could dupe any building material they wanted without fear of the exploit being patched by the server's admin, Housemaster. With players arriving at a secluded location millions of blocks out, and with a powerful new exploit, the scope of the project increased dramatically. The actual build site of Mew was moved further out in the millions due to an accidental leak of the coordinates, but this second location proved secure, and construction began. In order to keep the chunk dupe a secret, only select members of the project were allowed to know about it, so a spreadsheet system was used for builders to request materials, and sure enough, those materials would mysteriously appear in shulker boxes. All of this coordination was done on a single floating platform above a massive jungle biome, which would be the home of the base. The server's greatest civil engineer, Thebesandsound, the same person responsible for the Southern Canal, Obsidian Wall, and Great Spawn Trench, was brought on board for the project, and he brought several of his comrades with him. Now, with Thebes and the Southern Canal Corps on board with the project, it meant that 3 separate groups had united just to build this base together, and construction began. A basic blueprint of the base was created. There would be a giant man-made mountain in the center, with plains surrounding it, with tall cliffs at the outer edges. This was going to require an insane amount of terraforming, so much of the terrain needed to be destroyed by TNT bombers. Getting bombers to work was a challenge, as lag and the distance from spawn had to be taken into consideration, but a working method was found, and the bombings began. It was a daunting task. Not only did the entire jungle have to be cleared out, but the TNT was not going all the way down to bedrock as planned, so a second layer of bombers underneath had to be created. Not only that, but because 2B2T's render distance is relatively small, only tiny sections could be bombed at a time. It was a nightmare, but after weeks and weeks of non-stop work, the bombings were complete, and a massive hole in the jungle going all the way down close to bedrock had been accomplished. To them, that was just the easy part. It was time for the actual construction to begin. Tashi, who had been the lead builder at Summermelon, came up with the design for the centerpiece of Mew, the massive man-made mountain. But before it could be built, the hole itself had to be covered. Grass was applied strip by strip, which was a huge task. Once the exterior grass had been placed, construction of the mountain began. Because the mountain and the plains it rested on were hollow, the builders had accidentally created the largest man-made cave system in the server's history, so mobs spawning down there became a problem. With multiple players working on it at the same time, it took over 2 months to build, but after all the hours had been put in, the main centerpiece of the base was complete. The builders now had a blank canvas that they could use to create whatever they wanted. This is where the base truly started to take form. The Pokemon Mew became an unofficial mascot of the base since its name had the same pronunciation. Builder Drud14 would create a massive man-made swamp biome with a giant mushroom and village underneath, as well as a Greek-themed area in the basin. Much of the terrain surrounding the mountain was custom-made, with different builders contributing. Scribblefox was responsible for the Mesa section, as well as several villages surrounding the mountain. At this point, it was easy to forget that you were on 2B2T. Aaron Alvin created a giant build called the Temple of the Melon Goddess, which itself was more impressive than entire bases on 2B2T. Things were progressing smoothly, but in October of 2018, almost an entire year after construction of the base began, the item dupe that the builders had been using in secret was finally discovered by the public. This meant that Housemaster was likely to patch the dupe very soon, but Thebes, finally learning of the dupe's existence, was able to come up with a design that would allow the dupe to be performed at a much faster rate. Up to 37 shulker boxes per second could be duplicated with this design. By the time the dupe was eventually patched, over 200 million items had been created at Mew. The stashes that held these items were so massive that they actually began to lag the server anytime they were loaded. Because of this, Housemaster himself showed up at the base in order to delete the stash. The base members were honored that House had shown up, even if it was to delete their materials, and considered him an honorary member of the base. As 2019 began, it would be mainly an uneventful year for Mew. As the months went on, some of the builders got bored and weren't playing as much, but overall progress on the base continued. In 2020, it was decided that new builders would be allowed to come to the base, which rejuvenated interest from those that had gotten bored, and more plans for Mew were created. But unfortunately, this would be short-lived, as one of the largest Minecraft account exploits in the history of the game started being used on 2B2T. The exploit allowed any Minecraft account to be logged into, and one of the players that utilized this exploit was Jared2013, a notorious griefer on the server. He managed to log into accounts of well-known builders at Mew, and the base coordinates were compromised. It had taken a so-called act of God for the base to be discovered. Jared planned to grief Mew, but because it was millions and millions of blocks out, it was going to take him 1 to 2 weeks just to arrive. The members of the base knew that it was doomed, and decided to come together for one final act of defiance: Project Noah. The builders began flooding the entire base, making it much harder to grief. At the same time, others began moving valuable items out of the base and brought them to safety. Having an extra week of preparation made a huge difference, as when Jared finally arrived, much of the base had already been submerged. An iconic end to what was perhaps the most ambitious base in the server's history. Griefing the entire base block for block was going to be impossible, so the damage from the grief was greatly reduced. The coordinates went public, Burnsy made his post about the base, and soon others began arriving to see this massive secret for themselves. One of these players though, Hunbao, was smart enough to take a world download of the flooded base with only minor damage done to it. From there, another player, Universius, went into single player with the download and repaired much of the base on his own, removing the flooding and making it look just like the images that Burnsy had posted. The world download was nearly identical to the real thing, with about 90% of the base restored. As someone who has been documenting 2B2T history for a long time, I can say that even though the base was not fully completed, Mu Megabase is possibly the greatest base ever built on the server. Will there ever be a base to top it? I guess we'll see. Well, if you enjoyed today's history lesson, consider subscribing to the channel. It would mean a lot to me. Also, make sure to follow me on Twitter and Instagram to stay updated on when new content's coming out. But that's it for today, everyone. Take it easy, and we'll see you next time.